Please
you have
do.
all of these interesting, things in your bio, and we kind of want to like connect the dots, right? Like, how did you get from military, right, like to then going to cybersecurity to Twitch streamer? Can you kind of like walk us through some of that?
Yeah, okay. So so I guess it all kind of started off like I started off I technically signed up for the military when I was 17 years old. I wasn't even 18. I had to get my parents to sign on board. Um and like there were some hangups, so I ended up like not actually joining until I was 18 and like going to like basic training. And I went in with the intention of becoming a geospatial intelligence analyst, which could mean a lot of things, but it ended up meant mostly working with drones for a period of time. I actually got to work with like satellite stuff and got to do like a bunch of like humanitarian missions and things like that. And that was really cool. Um, but working with drones was sort of like most of what people in my job were doing and what I spent a lot of time doing. Um, and so with that, um, I mean, when you work with drones, you like see a lot of things uh,
When you
that are
say
not great,
drones, do you mean the big military ones? Like you're not talking like little drones, right?
Yeah, like predators, reapers, stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
They're actually, I didn't know what they were called. They're called predators and reapers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's
Death
like a
raiders.
handful of them. Predators, reapers. I think the global hawk is one of them. Or there's a bunch, right? There's tons and tons of like different drones. Um, but I mean, I'm certain you might have seen some of the footage of like the camera flying around looking at a random building or something, and then like firing missiles and whatnot. Um, it's a really, really difficult job. And in it, you really, like, if you're paying attention, right? If you're paying attention, you really see and understand a lot about how the United States goes about our foreign policy around the world.
Mm.
And it's not great, to say the very least. Like the harshest lesson that I unfortunately learned the hard way, as opposed to like, reading books like maybe I should have before I joined, um, is that most of the people um, that like the United States labels as terrorists around the world are basically just random people living their life. I mean, think about it, right? Like think about this for a second. Like if you're watching people who you have no understanding of their culture, you have no understanding of like what their daily life is like for the average person, how are you supposed to pick out what is suspicious and what isn't suspicious, right? Like, going to your family's house for like a wedding or just a dinner party or something like that could all of a sudden turn into like a secretive meeting or something, like picking up, groceries could turn into like secret meetings at the farmer's market, basically. Um, and so one of the things that you see in that, if you're paying attention and you actually take the time to like learn about the different cultures around the world that you are like, obviously involved in, you realize really, really quickly that like the sort of evidence that we have built against particular individuals to like justify drone strikes and things like that is very, very dicey. And it's all built on, to be honest, assumptions. I mean, think about it. If your job is, I mean, think about it like this. If your job is to create a list of targets, right, to build a target deck, your boss is going to tell you, hey, we need 20, we need 10 for this mission, right? We need 10 targets. So like the first couple are definitely going to be legit. You're going to have tons of evidence for it. You're going to have like a whole case and like profiles and things like that. But you've got to fill it up, right? You've got to fill up all the 10 or 20. And so as you go down the list, you start to see that everything is kind of more vague, right? And it just sort of gets more vague and more uncertain. But that's their job, right? Their job is to fill that target deck. And so that's exactly what they're going to do, regardless as to whether or not they have like the justification or the information to put people on that list. And so that really is like the heart of the problem. And a lot of people don't take the time to understand that. Like a lot of people, I even had one person while I was in the military try to make the case to me, try to say that like, oh no, we definitely send people down there to check to make sure it was the right person every time. And I'm like, have you ever seen those people? Have you ever seen those people? Like, so they have really ridiculous assumptions, even the people who work in this. But if you pay a little bit of attention, like you start to realize kind of how terrible it is. And knowing that just becomes like a very, very stressful reality um, that is just not something that you can really live with. And so from that, I transferred from active duty to the Guard because I just wanted to not work with drones anymore. And that's when I switched to cybersecurity. Um, from that, while I was in the Guard for cybersecurity, that's when I started getting into politics, like running that congressional campaign, running a state Senate campaign, running for office myself, all with like the hope of like changing things and like making things better. And then in that, you start to see the problems with the structure of the way that elections work, the problems with the structure of the way that like politics works in the United States. There's very much like this sort of good old boys club that exists. And not only that, but there's a lot of careerism where the sort of careerists are the ones that like, you know, they get dragged in right from their internships, right? They'll do unpaid internships with like, you know, senators or congressmen or something like that. And there's very much a pipeline. There's very much a pipeline from like specific colleges to work for specific, you know, electeds, to then running for office yourself. And so it's a very sort of tight-knit group of people that for the most part are deeply interested in careerism. They're not really, you know, a lot of them are sort of just rich people that see politics as like just like an edgy sort of career and not really as like this like life impacting, life altering thing. Um, and so during that time, I finished my master's degree and I started Twitch streaming. Um, and that is like really where like a couple years ago where I really started diving into, because at that point, right, obviously I had gotten, you know, 3 different degrees, my undergraduate social sciences degree, my 2 associates degree. So when I was finishing my master's degree, I I started reading more specifically like Marxist literature. Um, and like that just fit into everything that I like previously understood about like how politics works, how the military works, how imperialism works, and how like capitalism works broadly. And all of these things, like really the Marxist analysis was the one that sort of like wrapped it all in a neat little bow after I had already read people, you know, like Noam Chomsky and Naomi Klein and things like that. None of them ever really, I think, fully explain like the structural reasons for the problems that exist that they talk about in like their books. Um, and so, and then, you know, I got very, very lucky. I did this like Twitch pitch competition with TYT and they picked me up and that's kind of what I've been doing ever since.
That's a really great journey. You know, I think that you went and also I would say like probably not a lot of people have that level of awakening. You know, right? Like they will see things, but might not necessarily connect the dots and say that, oh, this is really bad. Maybe I should dig deeper, or maybe I should, you know, try to do
Yeah,
something about it. So
yeah, I mean, a lot of people really, I mean, like most people don't get the experience of like being behind the scenes and seeing how everything works, like both from like inside the military, how that works, right? And when you're in intel, it's a little bit different than even your average military experience because like, you know, I would bump into like 4-star generals. I even have a photograph somewhere in my apartment of me with a Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, right? So like, you know, you know, when you're in intel, it's kind of a different world than your sort of typical like service member. And then in politics, right, a lot of people don't see the sort of behind the scenes of like how campaigning works and like how like people get chosen for different positions within campaign offices and things like basic things like, for example, right, like legislation. When legislation is being written, very often what happens, especially at the state legislature level, is You'll have like your elected politician, their name will be on the bill and it will say that they wrote the bill. But the reality is that there are legal offices within legislatures where they're the ones who are usually really writing the bill. And they like with very bureaucratic positions will very often sort of filter what goes through their office to sort of match precedent. And it's just really, really funny because you will get instances where like those people in those legal offices will basically say things along the lines of, oh, there's no precedent for like a law like this, so we can't really write this or put it forward. I don't think, we can really do this. And it's always like with bills that are like trying to help people, right? Like basically like I've had a few instances where I've suggested things and basically gotten pushback where it's like, essentially, no, there's no precedent for actually helping people with our political system. I don't think you understand how this works. And so like, even when it comes to the way legislators go about their job, most of them don't even fully understand how their positions work. They will sort of like segment themselves off into individual committees and they'll show up to vote. But a lot of the representatives don't go through the effort of like really critically analyzing the environment that they are in, because a lot of these representatives came through this sort of like careerist pipeline, and they just assume that the system is working without taking any sort of deeper look at it.
Yeah, and even to have an internship like that is unpaid, that's a privilege. So
Yeah.
that automatically, I mean, I can even, I mean, I'm okay now, but when I was in school, like in college, I didn't have an internship during school because they were like, oh, we don't do paid internships. And I'm like, oh, well, I work and I have to pay rent. So,
Yeah.
yeah, like, so yeah, I mean, that's kind of a part of you're shut out, from the beginning.